Hi guys, it is that time again. Welcome to yet another monthly reading wrap up. I am so excited to film this wrap up because you guys, September has been my best reading month this year so far. If you know me, you know I'm a pretty picky rater. I don't give out a lot of 5 stars at all. The last time I gave a book 5 stars was all the way back in May, and in September I had multiple 5-star reads. So I found quite a few new favorites, including a new favorite book of the year. It's crazy though because I also found a new least favorite book of the year. So there were a couple flops, but the majority of the books I read were just so good that I haven't even thought twice about the books that I didn't like in September. I just can't stop thinking about the books that I fell in love with, and September just reminded me why I love reading so much. Unfortunately though, the first book I read in September was one of the flops, so we're starting off on a little bit of a negative note, but I promise it's going to get a lot better from there. The first book that I read in September is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham, and I know what you're thinking. You've probably never heard a bad review for this book before. I hadn't either, so I thought it would be a solid, safe choice. My reasonings actually for picking this one up are kind of long-winded. Basically, Freida McFadden, who we're going to talk about again later in this wrap-up, is a thriller author who's been getting a lot of hype lately, but she's also been getting a lot of criticism for kind of plagiarizing some of her books. I don't know how true that is, but that's just what I've heard. I've only read one book by Freida McFadden, and A Flicker in the Dark is one that gets compared to the book that I read by her. So I kind of wanted to read it for myself and see if it felt like she copied this book. And after reading it, they definitely have similar premises, but I definitely don't think it was plagiarized. So that was my reasonings for going into this one. This book follows a young woman named Chloe, and when Chloe was little, all these young girls in her area started going missing and turning up dead, and her father ended up being accused of their murder, and he was known as a serial killer, and he was put into prison, and he's been in prison all these years. But now in the present, there are more young girls going missing and turning up dead, and it seems to be kind of like copycat style murders to her father's killings. So it's bringing back a lot of bad memories for Chloe, and she's kind of concerned for her own safety as well. Now, I am not the most seasoned thriller reader. I'm not great at guessing plot twists. I would say I guess the plot twist in thrillers less than half of the time. However, when I do guess a plot twist, for me, that is not the end-all be-all. That does not mean I will necessarily give a book a bad rating, because sometimes everything else in the story is really good. If the journey leading up to the reveal is good and you just happen to put the pieces together and guess what's going to happen yourself, that to me doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad book. So with this book, about 10% of the way in, I had a prediction on what I thought the big plot twist was going to be. And I had heard this book had a lot of red herrings, so I was like, no, this definitely can't be the plot twist because it is so obvious. This has to be one of the red herrings that's being put in here as a plot device to throw me off. But the more I kept reading, the more everything was supporting my theory on what I thought the big reveal was going to be. Everything was just proving me right. So I'm like, this cannot be it. This has to be a red herring. It is so obvious. I wasn't enjoying my time regardless of that. I just didn't find anything enjoyable about the story. I didn't care about the characters really. But then the twist came and it ended up being my initial prediction, and I just couldn't even believe it because not only did I guess the twist, but I didn't think it was a good twist because of how predictable it was. This is the most predictable thriller I have ever read in my life, and even so, I was probably going to give this book like 2 stars. I didn't really enjoy anything about it, but it wasn't like a horrible book. However, the takeaway message that the author kind of leaves you with as like the final thoughts, I had a real problem with. It was something that I didn't condone, and I know it's fiction, but it just rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like the takeaway that I felt like was being left with the reader, so I had to give it a 1 star. I did not like this book at all. Would not recommend it, but to each their own. I hope everyone else that reads it enjoys it. I just didn't enjoy it, and it's probably my least favorite book that I've read so far this year. We're gonna stop being negative for a little bit because the next book I read is Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. This is the second book in the Boys of Tommen series. It is the second part of the Binding Keeping 13 duet. The first 2 books in this series follow the same couple, Johnny and Shannon. I read book 1, Binding 13, back in March, and it has remained my favorite book for the entire year until now. Binding 13 ends on a cliffhanger, so I immediately jumped into Keeping 13, and I read about 30% in that book, and then I don't know, I just kind of put it on the back burner because I had other books that I really wanted to get through, and I just really wanted to savor that one, take my time with it, put it on the back burner and save it for a time when I knew I really needed a book that I was going to enjoy. However, the more time that passed and the more I left that book, the less and less I thought about it, so it made me more and more scared to pick it back up because I was like, I don't know, I just haven't thought about this world in a long time. I haven't thought about these characters in a long time. It hasn't really stuck with me the way I thought it would. So I was worried that I was going to pick it back up and not love it as much as I thought I did. And I was afraid it might let me down. I just didn't want to be disappointed by it. But I was like, you know what? I have to read it in September because I'm about to get through all my fall books and then winter's coming. And if I don't read it now, I'm probably going to put it off until next year. But as soon as I started reading the page that I left off on, everything came back to me, and like 5 pages in, I fell back in love with the story and I was like, why did I leave this? I love this book so much. I love this world. I love these characters. I had no reason to worry about this book letting me down at all because I am just obsessed. I loved it even more than I loved Binding 13. I would give this book 1,000,000 stars if I could. It is my new favorite book of the year. There is not a thing in this book I would change about it. It was perfect in every way to me. I can't really tell you the plot of this book without spoiling the first book, but basically this is Johnny and Shannon's love story. Shannon has a really rough home life. She also has had a really rough time at school. She's been bullied for her whole life. So her mom ends up picking up a second job to be able to afford to send her to a private school in the hopes that she won't be bullied there. So that is when Shannon ends up going to Tommen College, and where she meets the star of the rugby team, Johnny Kavanaugh, and it follows their very slow burn romance. Johnny is the most perfect book boyfriend ever. Like, I could not think up, dream up, write a more perfect man myself. He just says the most perfect things. The way he's there for Shannon, the things he does, the way he cares for her. He is so perfect, but he still has flaws to his character, so he feels like a real person. And I love Shannon, and I love them together. Shannon's character development is so incredible. These books are very, very heavy though. I do want to stress that. Make sure you check trigger warnings. These aren't lighthearted, fun rom-coms. There's definitely fun moments in them, but they do cover very, very intense and heavy topics. But I just love all of these characters. The Found Family is my favorite. I cannot wait for Gibbsy and Claire's book, which comes out next April. These books are very, very long, but don't let the size intimidate you because I honestly could read like 10,000 more pages of Johnny and Shannon doing absolutely nothing and still love it. Them just saying hi to one another, like, hi Johnny, hi Shannon, has me, I can't even put into words. I love these books so much. You have to read them. If you were thinking about it, this is your sign to do it. Okay, and then I did end up picking up a Frida McFadden book. I read Ward D. This is a thriller following a med student named Amy, and she is working an overnight shift in the psych ward of this hospital, and she is dreading this overnight shift. You don't really know why, but as the night progresses, you find out some of her secrets. Weird things start happening in the psych ward of the hospital. People start going missing, and you just follow the progression of this one night during Amy's shift. And I gave this book 2 stars. I don't have too much to say about it. It was a quick and easy read, but it was nothing special at all to me. I wouldn't really recommend it. I feel like you don't really need to pick this one up. I don't know. There's not really much for me to say. I don't think it was anything too special. It was fine. It kept me somewhat entertained throughout my time reading, but nothing life-changing. Then I read Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is the book that follows Part of Your World. I read that book a couple months ago and loved it, so I knew I had to read the follow-up. It sounded like something that would be right up my alley. Our main female character in this book is a doctor named Bree, and our main male character is Dr. Jacob Maddox, and he is transferring to this new hospital, and he and Bree get off on the wrong foot. They have a really bad first impression, and Jacob writes Bree a letter explaining why they had a bad first impression, kind of apologizing, and she writes him a letter back, and then they start this correspondence to one another by sending each other letters, and from there their relationship develops. It does become a fake dating trope. I feel like you should just read for yourself to find out the details. The back does give quite a bit away, which I enjoyed learning for myself as I read. I feel like it was more impactful that way, but that was all I knew going into it, and I really, really enjoyed my time just knowing that. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. First, I just have to say the social anxiety rep in here was so good. I felt so seen. This book was such a good reminder why representation and being able to see yourself and relate to characters in books is just so important, because I truly connected to the character in this book with social anxiety, and I connected to the story so much. This book kind of solidified that Abby Jimenez is going to be an auto-buy author for me. I love her writing so much. The story had so much depth. The characters had so much depth to them, both individually and when they came together. I loved their relationship. The pacing of this was perfect. The banter was perfect. This book reminded me so much of People We Meet on Vacation, because Jacob reminded me a lot of Alex. Bree reminded me a lot of Poppy. Their banter felt very much like Emily Henry banter, the inside jokes they had. This book does have a miscommunication trope, which I know most people don't like. I, unpopular opinion, actually do like miscommunication trope because it feels very realistic to me. I also like it because you as the reader kind of know the inside scoop and like what the other person doesn't know, and it kind of builds up tension because you're just like waiting for them to tell each other what you already know, and you know that it's gonna be fine. I don't know, I just loved it so much. There were a few minor things in here that I didn't love and would have taken out, but I was just enjoying everything else about this book so much that it was nearly perfect to me, and definitely gave me the 5-star feeling. I cannot wait to read everything that Abby Jimenez has ever written, because I had the best time with this. This book gave me everything I want when I pick up a rom-com. This is like a nearly perfect rom-com to me. I wish every romance book I picked up was like this one. Then I read The Grace Year by Kim Liggett, and this one has been described to me as The Handmaid's Tale and Hunger Games meets Lord of the Flies, but with girls instead of boys. And I would say that's pretty accurate. This is a YA dystopian, and in the town that this book is set in, all the girls growing up are told that they possess this magic within them that can tempt men and can turn the town into complete chaos. So when they turn 16, the girls are sent out into the woods for a year, known as their Grace Year, to get rid of their magic. And no one really knows what goes on during the Grace Year. There's all kinds of stories and rumors about it, but we are following this group of girls as they go out into the woods for their Grace Year. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. The beginning really hooked me, but the middle really dragged for me. I thought it was very slow, and I didn't love the pacing of it. I just wasn't really sucked in. I was kind of ready to get to the end and get to the reveal. I did really like our main female character. She reminded me a lot of Jude from The Cruel Prince. She was just very strong, and a lot of her scenes reminded me of The Cruel Prince as well, so I did get vibes of that. The ending, I will say, I really did like, and I liked how the story wrapped up. But overall, it was just okay to me. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't love it. I know this story is so beloved for a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people give it 5 stars, but to me, it just kind of felt like a culmination of all the books it gets compared to. I felt like I read the story many times before. Not that it's not important, and not that the story isn't worth telling, because it definitely is, but I don't know, I feel like this version of it just didn't really add anything new. Then I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This one follows a recently widowed actress named Casey, and she's kind of been in the midst of some bad press lately. So she is holed away in her lake house in Vermont, and this new couple just moved in the house across the lake. The wife in the couple is this famous supermodel, and then the husband is this big tech guy. He created this famous app, and Casey finds a pair of binoculars in the lake house, and to pass the time, she starts spying on them and making observations, and she quickly comes to learn that they have some struggles in their marriage and there is something going on between them. And then a couple days later, Catherine, the wife, ends up going missing. So Casey becomes very invested in what happened to Catherine. Going into this, I knew that people generally liked the story, but the thing that makes or breaks it for people on whether or not they love or hate this book is the twist. People are so split on the twist. So I was so anxious to know what the twist was going to be, and I ended up actually liking it. I gave this book 4 stars. Riley Sager is definitely an auto-buy author for me. No matter how I feel about his books, I feel like there's been some I loved and some I didn't love, but I always enjoy his writing. I feel like he brings something new to the thriller genre, because most time thrillers really focus on the plot and the storyline and the twist, and I feel like the characters kind of become an afterthought, but I think Riley Sager does a really good job job in all of his books at writing relatable, dynamic, fleshed out characters. I would also say Riley Sager's writing is very different. I wouldn't say it's flowery, but it is a little bit more descriptive, and he always has very picturesque settings. This one I thought was going to be more of like a summary book, so that's why I read it in September, because of the lake setting, but it actually takes place in October, and it takes place in Vermont, and the fall foliage is mentioned a lot, so it ended up being perfect. I would recommend this for the fall. I really enjoyed following Casey in this book, and I got really invested in what was going to happen. I thought this book was so hard to put down. It just kept getting more and more twisty, and I do think that the big reveal plot twist was very over the top, but I don't know, I was entertained by it. It didn't really bother me. I still found the book to be very enjoyable. I feel like all of Riley Sager's books too read like a scary movie, which I love. Some of them are cheesy, some of them I like more than others, but I'm always entertained, and I really enjoyed this one. This is probably my second favorite book by him. After Home Before Dark, I just really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a good one. Then I read all 3 books in the To All the Boys I've Loved Before trilogy by Jenny Han. I got the first book physically from the library, and after I finished book 1, I wanted to immediately hop into book 2, but it was a bit of a wait for the second physical book from the library, so I found it on Hoopla, and I ended up listening to the audiobook of books 2 and 3. This is a pretty popular series. I feel like if you haven't read the books, a lot of people have seen the movies on Netflix. They were quite popular as well, but if you don't know, basically the premise is that we're following Lara Jean Covey. She is the middle of 3 sisters, and she has written a love letter to every boy that she's ever had a crush on. Whenever she has really intense feelings, writing it down in a letter is her way of getting it out. She addresses it to them, but she doesn't mail it to them. She keeps it for herself as kind of like a diary entry, and she stores it away, and it's kind of just how she gets her feelings out, how she closes the chapter on her feelings for someone when she's ready to move on. But one day the letters mysteriously get sent out to all the boys that she has written them to, and we're following the aftermath of the letters being sent out. I put this trilogy on my 23 books I want to read in 2023 list because last year I read The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han and loved it so much more than I was expecting to. I kind of picked it up just to be in the loop with the show coming out. I feel like the series was gaining in popularity, so I just wanted to give it a try, and I did not expect to love Jenny Han's writing as much as I did, and it ended up being one of my favorite books that I read last year, so I definitely wanted to read more from her. And as the year progressed, I kind of put this series on the back burner. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna get to it, but I am so glad that I did. I ended up giving the first book 4.75 stars, the second book 4.25 stars, and the third book 5 stars, and I would give this trilogy overall 5 stars. If it was like one long book, this would easily be a 5-star read, and this is a new favorite series of all time for me. I loved it so much. I don't read a lot of YA at all, and usually it's because I just don't connect to the characters of the story, which I'm not really supposed to. Obviously I'm not the target audience, but for some reason I connect to Jenny Han's characters and the stories she creates so much. I don't know, something about her writing just feels so nostalgic, and even though the things that her characters are going through aren't relevant to my life right now, I remember feeling the way Lara Jean felt at one point or another. So reading her books is just like opening one of my old journals from middle school or high school and being transported to some of my favorite and some of my cringiest memories from growing up. And this was just such a sweet coming of age story. I loved it so much. This book reminded me how much I love sister relationships in books. I want to be one of the Covey sisters. I loved them. I loved seeing them bring out the best and the worst in each other. I loved Kitty, the youngest sister. She was hilarious. I was laughing out loud constantly throughout this book, and it was mostly because of Kitty. She would say the most out-of-pocket things, but it was so funny. Their dad was just so sweet and so precious. Another thing I really love about this series is you kind of don't know who the love interest is. You don't know exactly what guy she's gonna end up with, but I just love this trilogy so much. It was good both physically, and the audiobook was great as well. I am obsessed. It's a new comfort series for me, a new favorite, and I'm obsessed with Jenny Han's writing. If I wasn't already before, I definitely am now. I hope she's writing more books because I need more from her. I know she has one more YA series. I think it's called like Ashes to Ashes or something like that I'll probably give a try, but I haven't heard much about that trilogy, so I'm not sure, but I will read anything she writes. I'm just obsessed. And then I finally read Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. This one's been on my TBR for so long. I've been anticipating it for so long, and I finally got around to it in September. You've probably heard a lot about this series, but basically it follows this friend group in high society London. They're all socialites, all very privileged, all very wealthy. In particular, in this book, we're focused on the very toxic on-again, off-again relationship between Magnolia Parks and BJ Valentine. They kind of grew up together. They've always been in the same social circles. They went to the same boarding school. So Magnolia and BJ know each other very well. They know each other inside and out. For better or worse, they are able to get on each other's nerves, push one another's buttons. We learn in the past at one point they did have a good relationship, but something happened that started this toxic cycle of them making each other jealous and getting with other people, getting together and breaking up and doing it all over again. And it is very messy, very frustrating characters. When I first started it, it was not really what I thought it was going to be. You're kind of like thrown into the chaos, and it took me a minute to adjust and figure out who everyone was. It's kind of written in a way where you're like shown everything and then kind of told the backstories, and everything is explained later, and you kind of learn things as you go. And I didn't love the characters right away. I mean, I didn't think they were going to be the most likable. I knew this was about a toxic relationship, but they were just a lot more shallow at the start than I thought they were going to be. It's very much like this designer, who's wearing this brand name, going to this gala, this charity event, my private plane or yours, this luxury vacation. But slowly I became so invested, so immersed. The more I learned about the characters, the more I was like, okay, this is why they are the way they are. There is depth to them. They're struggling. They're going through things like everyone else, even if their lifestyle isn't like everyone else. And I ended up giving this book 4.75 stars. I kind of toggled back and forth between 5 and 4.75, but I don't think I was quite as invested and quite as connected to the characters as people who really love this series are. I watched a lot of reading blogs of people having visceral reactions to the series, and I wasn't quite at that level of obsession, but I do think this is a series that the more I read it, the more invested I'm gonna get. And I definitely can see myself rating later books in the series 5 stars. This was almost there for me, but it just needed a little something more. When I put this book down, all I could think about was the next time I was able to pick it back up, because I just could not stop thinking about these characters. The friend group in this and the writing style kind of reminded me of The Secret History in a way. Take that with a very big grain of salt, because they're definitely super different, but something about the tone of the writing and just the way the characters are so fascinating, but a lot of them are very unlikable, reminded me of The Secret History. The Gossip Girl comparisons are definitely very accurate. If you've ever watched Skins, reminded me a bit of that too. I get the hype. This was very different to anything I've ever read, and I ate it up. Then I read Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I don't hear a lot about this book, but it's been on my TBR for a while because the people that do talk about it rate it very highly. It gets compared to Sally Rooney a lot, which if you know me, you don't have to say anything else. If you compare something to Sally Rooney, I will definitely want to pick it up and read it. And I swear I heard someone say that this book is perfect to read in September because it has end of summer vibes and early fall vibes, so that is what I did. And basically this book follows a young woman named Casey Peabody. She lives in Boston, and she is a struggling writer. She has been working on writing this novel for like 6 years. She's kind of in a bad place in her life because her mother just passed away and she just got out of a really bad relationship. She works as a waitress to supplement her income while she's working on her novel, and in this book she ends up falling in love with 2 very different men. There's not a very clear storyline in this. It is very slice of life and more day-to-day mundane things, which is why I think it gets compared to Sally Rooney. It's definitely more of a character-driven story, but this one was unfortunately a disappointment to me. I ended up giving it 2 stars. This is one of those books where I kept reading and reading and thinking it was about to get better and just like waiting, and it never got better, and I just never really connected to the story. I never connected to Casey or any of the characters. I couldn't really empathize with her, and not to sound harsh, but I like wasn't rooting for things in her life to go right because I just wasn't invested and I just didn't really care. And I don't know, I felt like some of the decisions she made weren't the best decisions, and in the end I feel like it's supposed to reflect that Casey is going through this big character development, but it didn't really come across that way to me. It just kind of felt like things started working out for her and she started having good luck. I don't know, there were bits I liked about it. I've never read a book where a character works in the restaurant industry, and I really enjoyed those scenes. There were a few side characters that I enjoyed more than Casey, but sadly, overall, this one was kind of a disappointment for me. And the last book that I read in September is the second book in the Ravenhood trilogy, which is called Exodus by Kate Stewart. I can't say much about the plot in this book without giving away what happens in book 1, and you should go into book 1 knowing very little, but basically in this trilogy we follow a young woman named Cecilia. She has basically no relationship with her father. She's been kind of estranged from him her whole life. Her father is a very wealthy man who runs this technology plant, and in order to get her inheritance from him, she has to go live with him and work in his plant for a year. So while she is doing that, she ends up meeting and getting involved with this group of guys, and she notices they all have the same raven tattoo. And when she asks them about it and asks them what it means and asks them what their group is about, she doesn't really get answers from them. They're very evasive, and she ends up not finding out what's really going on until the end. Book 1 ended on a cliffhanger, so I immediately jumped into book 2, Exodus, and after the first few chapters, the book really dragged for me, which is why it took me a while to get through this one, and I didn't finish it until the end of the month. The first half was super slow, and I didn't love it, mostly because we're introduced to a new character, and I did not like this character at all. I also didn't like the direction that Cecilia's character took. I wasn't a fan of her as much in book 2. This book dragged a lot in the beginning, and there was a lot of inner monologue, and Cecilia was just kind of irritating me. So the book was kind of feeling like a 3-star all the way through until the last 30%, and the last 30% was so good. From the 70% mark to the end, it felt like a 5-star read. I was getting all these reveals that I was not expecting. All the questions I had were answered, and I was so satisfied with all the answers that I got, and I loved the way the story wrapped up. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. Honestly, I feel like the story could have ended there, but when you get to the last page of this book, it's like the story is far from over. Continue on to book 3. So I don't really know the direction that book 3 is gonna take. Book 2, the ending, ended up really saving it for me. It definitely is so much different than book 1. So if you really enjoyed book 1, book 2 is gonna feel a lot different, but again, I loved that last 30%. It really saved it for me. So those are all the books that I read in the month of September. So that is going to conclude this reading wrap up. I'm so happy I had a great reading month. Even though there were a few misses, the 5 stars and the new favorites made up for it. Let me know what you guys read in September. Let me know if we read any of the same books and what your opinions are on them. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys so soon in my next video. Bye guys.